Hello, everybody. I'm the Night Sky Prince, and today I am joined by a very, 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 very special guest. We're going to be talking about the game design and storytelling of what we know so far in Final Fantasy XVI. I am joined today by Mike from Resonant Arc. This guy makes some of the most incredible analysis content on JRPGs, and not just JRPGs anymore. You've expanded into other things, like I saw like your Metal Gear Solid podcast and all these other things. Can you tell chat a little bit about what you do over on your channel? And guys, I love it. I love it so much.
Well, thank you for the introduction. It's good to talk to you again. It's been a couple of years, I think. I don't know how long it's been. It's been too long. So I mean, originally the channel was kind of, the video essay format that is pretty popular now for game content on YouTube. Retrospectives, video essays breaking down storytelling, game design, things like that. A little bit of news we dabbled in for a while. That wasn't really our thing. But we've sort of shifted focus a little bit to a podcast we do now, which is all about really deep, long dives into, in particular, the storytelling techniques and thematic content of games that we perceive to be on the same level, or at least in the same ballpark as some of the greatest literature or film. Content that really moves people, that really gets people thinking. So, I think that in terms of my time on YouTube, with talking about games, it kind of stemmed from Final Fantasy, and so there's been a lot of JRPG and sort of adjacent genres that we've talked about and that the audience is probably most interested in. But I've always really loved adventure games. That's kind of where I started, and it's actually my favorite genre. I love horror titles. I love a lot of different things, and so we're really more interested in just talking about good storytelling in games and not necessarily trying to stick to a particular genre. But there's no doubt that the JRPGs perform best and that people are more excited, I would say, for us to talk about whether it be Final Fantasy or Xeno games or those types of things. But we've covered Xenogears, Xenosaga Episode 1. We're certainly going to finish the Xenosaga series, but we've also talked about Silent Hill, which is what we're doing right now, Silent Hill 2. We've talked about Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, which I think is an absolutely outstanding game. And so, there's lots of others that we sprinkle in between, Mass Effect. But I mean, the bread and butter, I think, is always going to be Final Fantasy when it's all said and done. So when we finish up with Silent Hill 2, which we're going to be recording the final episode tomorrow, the next game we do is probably going to be BioShock. That's what it's looking like right now. But then after that, we're going to return back to an FF title. We'll probably have a vote between FF9, FF6, FF12, and FF15. We'll see which of those four people want us to talk about next. So,
wow, that sounds really good. I would love to see a talk on FF12 or FF15, because I feel like you guys have so many great things to say. You guys have great things to say about pretty much every game that you guys talk about, for sure.
Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XVI. Do you want to kind of briefly run people down on where you're at with Final Fantasy and just your general thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI?
Okay, so when did that first trailer for FF16 come out? I mean, it was a couple of years ago.
September 2020, I want to say, around there. 2020.
I think the first time I saw that, I was sitting in a doctor's office with my girlfriend at the time, and I was just watching it on my phone with very low volume. And so I don't think my first experience with the announcement was probably ideal. I still feel like that trailer wasn't like the best in terms of its structure and execution. And it set up, I think, certain assumptions about, wait a minute, like this looks to be more of a pure action game. Some of the things that you've listed here that we're going to talk about, like party focus and things like that were kind of brought into question. I know that the most recent trailer, which you sent to me a couple days ago, I didn't even realize that it had. This is how far out of the loop I am at this point. Like, I didn't even realize the Game Awards were happening, and that that was happening on the day that you sent me that. I didn't even know that it was happening.
You missed the Bill Clinton meme.
Well, I didn't miss the meme because that exploded hours after the fact, and it was really funny. But I didn't. I mean, like I said, priorities in my life have changed in such a way to where I'm very out of the loop on things as of like right now. And so basically, like, the most time that I get to play games is devoted strictly to whatever we're doing on the podcast. So, like, I'm balls deep in Silent Hill 2. I don't know about anything else that's going on right now. I'm just totally out of the loop. So, but I did see that trailer when you sent it to me, and I thought it was really, really, really good. Like, I thought that was a very strong trailer, the last one that came out. So, as most people who listened to me talking about FF over maybe the last couple of years knows, like, I do feel like probably since the merger with Enix that the Final Fantasy series has changed really dramatically in a way that it doesn't really resemble to me anymore, what I grew up loving. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I say that while being a big fan of FF12, for instance. I really like Final Fantasy 12. I even like Final Fantasy 15, like, all things considered. I had a good time with it. I don't think it's horrible. I was a little bit disappointed that it doesn't like quite achieve its potential in certain areas, but like I still liked the game. So when I say that I feel like it has shifted or that it's different from what it once was, that's not to say that it's bad. The only Final Fantasy games I've played that I did not like were 13 and 11. So, I still think that it's really well made. I mean, obviously they're still good. It's just I'm not the biggest, like, I don't know what genre you would put Devil May Cry into.
Character action
focused game.
Right.
Yeah, like, that's not really my jam. But I do think the story looks really interesting. I like the tone they're going for. I like the setting. I really love some of the artwork. Like, I don't know what city it is. They kind of show it's like along the shore, and it's just like this towering, sort of almost triangular kind of city in the distance. You know which one I'm talking about?
Triangular?
It
Wait.
Sort of slopes. It's like along a shore.
Stem Brick.
Like
Stem
built
Brick.
into a cliff.
Stem Brick, yeah. Which, yeah.
I love that. As far as like a fantasy design, this like look and feel is like 100% like what I'm into. I'm very much into that kind of medieval, darker kind of fantasy. Elden Ring was amazing. I loved Elden Ring. So, like, so there's a lot there that is really appealing to me, and I will definitely play Final Fantasy XVI. I just don't know if I have. I'm not. I'm neither here nor there, I guess, on developing an opinion on what I expect from it or what I hope it to be. I just. I guess we'll just see when it comes out.
That's almost the smarter way to be. I feel like, right? Because I feel like our expectations can only betray us, especially when it comes to kind of like how people have had their expectations in the past of Final Fantasy and then what we've gotten. So I feel like having leveled expectations will probably help you enjoy the game more than if you have, skyrocketed those expectations. This is going to be the best game ever, and then it comes out and you get all these shortcomings.
I think the only game that I have purchased at launch in the last couple of years was Elden Ring, and I didn't even play it at launch. And so I've kind of just gotten it was at least 2 or 3 months after it had come out that I finally started a file on it. So
is that your game of the year, by the way?
It's like the only game I've played this year.
Game of the year. You guys hear that? Elden Ring. Elden Ring, my game of the year. Let's go.
My game of the year. It's the only one I've played.
Oh man.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, basically the only time that I have to put into games these days, it basically goes into whatever is on the podcast. And you know, I have been traveling quite a lot for work, and so I got a Steam Deck. And I've had that for long flights, but the battery is so like suspect on that thing. You got to have it, you know, plugged in to really like enjoy games for like a long play session.
Yeah.
So basically that's mostly where I've been able to even put time into Elden Ring. But you know, I really wanted, I got sent a code from Square Enix for Tactics Ogre, and I started playing that one, and I really like it. I just don't have time to play past the first chapter. I just don't have time. The time isn't there. It's gone. But I really, really liked that. So I guess that's the second game that I played a little bit of this year. But that's not really a game from this year. It's a game from 1994 or 5 or whatever it was. So it doesn't really count.
They did an incredible job remastering, though.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. So we're going to start this off with Final Fantasy is a massive series with a very long lineage, one that divided around the time of around Final Fantasy VI and VII, and we have now the 2 Final Fantasy divisions today, which is CBU-1, which is led by Kitase, and CBU-3, which is now led by Naoki Yoshida. And under CBU-3 is many of the former Evil East developers who worked under Matsuno. In particular, we have Kazutoyo Mahiro, who worked on Final Fantasy Tactics. He worked on Vagrant Story. He worked on Final Fantasy XII, and he also worked on Heavensward, which I'm a very big fan of Heavensward. Really great expansion for 14 that told an incredible story, and also Heavensward is inspiring this title as well. In fact, Sembrick, the city that you really liked, it doesn't have like quite the same design, but it is definitely inspired by a city in 14 called Ishgard, if you look at it. I really love the artwork that they've done for both games, but that's neither here nor there. With it being so long since CBU-3 has touched a single player mainline entry, are you looking forward to seeing something brand new with this, especially since the last few games from Final Fantasy have mostly been Creative Business Unit 1, right? We're coming off of the 13 trilogy and 7 remake, and 15 was done by Luminous Pro, but they're kind of out of the picture now in terms of Final Fantasy titles. So are you excited to see something from this group of people whose ideas and philosophies are so different than what we've been seeing?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I've kind of talked ad nauseum at this point about my, I don't know, I guess, distaste for or disagreement with the kind of core design philosophy of Creative Business Unit 1's like world, particularly maps, the way that they handle maps. And that's been true since like FF10, right? It's kind of the same guys. FF10, FF13, FF7 remake. So like, again, that's not to say that it's bad or it's like a wrong design. It's just not my cup of tea, right? So, yeah, like I've certainly enjoyed Vagrant Story, Final Fantasy Tactics, the Matsuno-led games, Final Fantasy XII for a certain period of time. And so I guess knowing that sort of like history for what those developers do, I would say I have a lot of confidence in that the tone, at least, or the I guess style that they're going for will be something that aligns with my tastes. Like, I feel pretty confident about that. And I've dabbled with Final Fantasy XIV. I think I've started a file probably 3 or 4 times on different occasions over the years, and never really got very far because I'm just not an MMO guy. It's just really hard for me to play MMOs. So to see, I guess, some of the things that people who have been trying to convince me to play 14, the things they want me to get out of 14 in terms of storytelling, in terms of characters, in terms of thematic content, so forth, to be able to kind of see some of that from more of like the single player RPG, rather than having to try to force myself to trudge through the MMO RPG format, which I just is really not for me, will be nice. I'm excited, to kind of see what they do with that. And I guess to some degree we have seen, some of it back in FF12 and Vagrant Story and things like that. So, I do feel confident that it'll be something that, even if maybe the battle system is not exactly for me, that the presentation, particularly for cutscenes and things like that, will be something that aligns a little bit more. Maybe questing, too, will be something that aligns a little bit more with what I like. So,
right. And the thing with 14 especially is that with it being an MMORPG, it does get better after a while. A lot of it has to do with the base game, which has not aged well. And that's why I'm sure you've heard the mantra, you just got to get through a Realm Reborn. Then once you get into Heavensward Onward, it's a lot smoother, because it feels like, with the state of how they had to develop a Realm Reborn in, where they basically had to slap together a brand new game immediately to replace an old game. And I mean, back then they also didn't have much of a budget for voice acting and stuff, and so most of the expansions have like 2 or 3 times the amount of voice acting that a Realm Reborn has. And then on top of that, they also have much more lively animated cutscenes, and it gets way more easy to get through after that point. It really is just that first, 40 hours of the game that are just so tough to get through. And then once you get through that, that's when it tends to click for most people who are single player people, because I'm not an MMO guy at all, and you could not convince me to play any other MMO ever. But this is the first MMO that I've also seen too that was story driven, right? Which is an interesting idea for an MMO, a genre which is almost the antithesis of what you would imagine, like a genre that's suited for telling a good story in a video game, right? And then you have this game, which so many people would call their favorite Final Fantasy in terms of the story. So I think that's a testament really to Creative Business Unit 3 and
you've played Final Fantasy XI pretty recently, right?
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
Final Fantasy XI
had a feeling.
Oh man, it's not like 14. We'll just say that, right? Like,
no, it's not.
14 and 11 are like on like 2 completely different. 14 is designed for people with jobs and who might have kids, and they can sit down and play for like 1 or 2 hours every night and really get something out of the story and out of the content. Final Fantasy XI, even now, which they've removed almost all the grinding and you can really just kind of play through it, just learning how to access the game and how to log in is like a huge undertaking, right? And man, there is just so many remnants of like bad PS2 design that they had to make fit into a 32 megabytes of memory on PlayStation 2. And it was it was really, really tough, right? Yeah, and it was also before World of Warcraft, as chat mentions, which really set like kind of like the foundation of what an MMO is, which is ironic now because 14 has basically taken that formula and inserted this idea of what if we took that formula and made it story driven.
Am I remembering correctly that Final Fantasy XIV has now surpassed World of Warcraft as the most subscribed to MMO in the world?
It has not, but it is number two. It is number two. Yeah.
Okay.
And for a long time, WoW has been going this way in terms of active subscribers, and 14 has been going this way. So who knows what things will look like years from now, but currently WoW is still the top dog, just because they've been around for so long in that space, and they really kind of created it. You know, when you're first, you get to be dominant for a long time. And unless someone comes and really makes something superior, and I think a lot of people like WoW's combat better, but 14's story is really what sells people on it. And combat is probably something that's more mainstream for a lot of people versus like telling like this really high quality ongoing fantasy story that may not be for everyone to keep up with. Last we chatted, you said one of the big things you want to see out of this game is some sort of party focus. We now have party members. Sidolphus Telemon, dominant of Ramu, being a direct reference to Thunder God Sid from Final Fantasy Tactics. How are you feeling about the currently revealed party members?
You're going to have to elaborate on how it actually works.
How the party system actually works.
Yeah, I mean, you're not actually. Well, I think I remember you saying something that there's other playable characters at certain points, right?
So the opening of the game has been compared to Final Fantasy XII, in that there will be some type of opening where you play as another character, but for the most part, you are going to be Clive. The way party members are going to work is that they are going to not have health bars, and they will be AI controlled. You will have, at most points throughout the game, Yoshi P says the majority of the game, you're going to have party members with you. However, they'll be AI controlled, no health bars, and for the most part...
So they don't die, they don't get KO'd?
No. That we know of. They may have some type of incapacitation mechanic. They haven't really touched on that, but you're not going to be micromanaging them. Instead, they want the gameplay to focus on Clive. Clive can activate different abilities, or he can play like different characters by switching his icons, which allows him to have different movesets. But they want the gameplay to focus on Clive and making sure that Clive's experience was good. And you'll always have your other party members with you for the most part throughout the game. However, they're taking the sort of responsibility away from you of having to sort of micromanage them in combat. How do you feel about that system? You know, especially coming off of something like Final Fantasy XV when that game first came out. They're just you couldn't control any of the other party members, and that was a big problem. But part of the problem with 15 though was also that they had health bars, and you had to constantly kill them and revive them.
Well, now in 15 they've got a party switching mechanic, right, where you can switch between, because they released all the DLC where they had actually built out like how each character functions combat wise, and then they decided to like make that. So I have no idea how that feels because I haven't tried that, but I'm just gonna be honest, gut reaction from what you just described, it sounds like there's not a party focus.
Right.
It sounds like a PR speak way of trying to like appeal to people who were calling for that, while essentially saying no, there's not a party focus. They might as well not be there in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the combat itself, right? You're still just controlling one person. It's still just a character action game, right? So but you know, I mean, I guess having them as part of the story, that's sort of kind of a key component of FF games, is, you know, like a party of characters who are banding together. So I mean, that's nice. But yeah, that I mean, I'm just honestly, that just sounds to me like he's dancing around saying it doesn't have a party focus, but essentially saying that.
Right.
That's just how it sounds to me.
Right.
Which is, again, I mean, if that's the core of the experience, it's a character action game. Like, that's probably the right move, right? If you want to design a really well-made character action game, Bayonetta style,
right,
Devil May Cry style, and this is something
right.
I've talked about a lot in the past on my channel. Like, there's sort of it's really hard when you have a combat style that is that like combo centered, where you have to put inputs in really precisely. You're juggling enemies in the air or these sorts of things. It's there's a lot of attention that has to go into like managing one character. Like, it's kind of impossible to manage more than one at that point. You can't give input to two characters at the same time. So if the core of the battle experience is built around that principle of fast combat and juggling and comboing, it's probably just makes the most sense to not add more characters, because it wouldn't really work. I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake was kind of probably the closest that I've seen anyone come outside of like, have you ever played Rogue Galaxy?
No, I haven't. I heard it's great though.
Rogue Galaxy's awesome, and I think Rogue Galaxy is my favorite in terms of this sort of hybrid style between action combat and like command-based combat, right? Where you're managing and you can switch freely between different party members. Rogue Galaxy does it really well, but Final Fantasy VII Remake was like, it's like also like right there for me. I think they did a really good job. So I guess I find it surprising that they would decide, well, it's a different creative business unit. It's a different team who was working on it probably simultaneously to FF7 Remake's development. So they probably just had decided from the beginning that they were going to go this way with it. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point.
No.
I think that based on what I've seen from the combat, it's the right choice to not have a party, a controllable party like everybody.
Right. You can control one other character, by the way, I forgot to mention, and that's Torkel, the dog. So the dog is basically going to function like Atreus does, and you played God of War, right? 2018.
The first one, yeah.
So you played 2018. He's going to basically function the same way as Atreus does, and you will be able to control the dog. And he has commands that are mapped to the D-pad, so you can use him, and then the other two party members will be AI controlled.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So it's like, what is there? Maybe like a cooldown or something on certain moves that the partner character can do.
Yeah.
And then you just press whichever D-pad button is assigned to that, and then they'll do it. Yeah. I guess they kind of had that in 15 as well. Right. Like every once in a while, you could do that little. I don't know what it was. I can't remember. It's been so long. Where you team up with that guy and you do like a special move with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So they'll have that for the dog. So the dog's basically going to function a lot like Atreus did in God of War. I'm personally it can work. I mean, and I'm repeating myself at this point, but if the focus is like combat in the style of Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, it makes 100% perfect sense to me to not try to give you like multiple characters to control in one battle. That's just kind of tough to do. Yeah, it is tough to do. I tend to like action games that are focused on the character that I'm controlling, which I understand is not very Final Fantasy. Right?
Yeah, sure.
It's not very Final Fantasy to do. But I'll tell you that I'll have a better experience with like a God of War game than I will with most JRPGs where I'm having to control multiple party members that are running into AoEs, and then I have to and the AI is not that helpful, right? And I do think that Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example, does things the best. And even with Final Fantasy VII Remake, the moment I switch away from Cloud and I go to another character, if you really look at their AI, they're not really doing that much.
No, they kind of dabble around. They spend a lot of time just sort of walking.
Yeah. Cloud, like if you switch away from
just
Cloud, like his AI, he'll just be guarding. He'll just be walking back and forth, walking, and he won't actively be doing it. And I don't think that that's necessarily like bad either. I just think that it has to be that way, because if Cloud was actively doing stuff and he was like really thinking, then it would immediately take urgency away from the player. And the player would just be like, well, what do I need to do, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't know the boss mechanics, you can just switch away from the characters that you don't want to play as, and you can just watch them fight the boss, and while you stand back and just... right? So
I really feel like they were close with FF12's...
Gambit system, right? Yeah.
Gambit system. I mean, it's like you need a Gambit system with... You can give sort of elaborate if-then sort of commands. And then you got to play Rogue Galaxy. Rogue Galaxy is great, but I feel like if Rogue Galaxy had a Gambit system as robust as FF12's, that'd basically be the perfect hybrid to me. Well, and then FF7's FF7 remakes, like bullet time, almost sort of slow down while you're in menus. Like you combine like those three concepts together, I feel like it would be kind of that perfect hybrid between command and action that I've been looking for. So it's like FF7 remakes, bullet time while you're issuing commands, FF12's Gambit system and AI, I guess, and then I guess the feel for switching around and like actually carrying out or executing attacks like Rogue Galaxy would be like... that would be perfect for me.
Yeah, no, completely understand, because then that would be like the optimal level of control. And this is something Baby Seal mentions I find to be interesting. It's important to me that 16 has its own combat, and to me, where combat will really define the actual story experience is going to be the icon sequences. Those I'm actually like really nervous about.
What is the thought so far on how the summons work in 16?
So
I know like there are characters themselves who like become them. They transform into it or something.
Right.
So like Clive will become Ifrit, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's called being a dominant.
So it'll be like almost a separate battle system that'll be just like the summons fighting each other, right? Almost like a
correct.
What would it be like a fighting game, almost like separate sort of mini game?
What Yoshi P has teased about the situation is that he describes it as like, he says that each icon battle is going to be entirely unique mechanically. And so nice. Each one is going to play out differently. And he says that they haven't reused anything from any of the icon fights. So they're going to be their entirely unique little set pieces that are separate from each other.
Interesting.
I feel like that's the best way to build it, because if you're going to believably have two gods fighting each other that are varying elements, how else are you going to flesh that out in terms of gameplay? Because it's just like, there's no way one system can really cover all that. Not in this level of graphical detail too.
Well, I guess my thought on that is like, in one way it's kind of exciting, because it's like, oh, it'll mix things up quite a bit and you won't know like what to expect from each one of them. At the same time, I feel like games kind of require repetition in order for you to really learn and like master something, right? So if you're gonna be introduced to a new mechanic for it to never show up again, that's my concern. I could see that being kind of frustrating, where it's like, oh, you maybe like, one thing I've always is a kind of a peeve of mine, I guess, is when I kind of like get through I don't know, a sequence in a game feeling like I got lucky, or like I didn't really understand it. I just kind of like mashed my way through that, and I feel like, oh, I didn't really deserve to pass that or something. I don't feel like I got like a strong grasp mechanically of what I was supposed to do. I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, or I have no idea how they're handling this, but I could foresee, I guess, getting through a section like that and being like, oh man, I wish I could do that again. Like, I wish I could like focus more on learning the mechanics of that. And if it's going to go away entirely, I could see that being a little disappointing. But I do like the idea of each one being kind of like a separate thing too, because it's like, I guess you can really change the set piece, right? You could have one take place like in the air, you're flying around. You could have one take place in a very different setting and design it around the arena almost, I guess. So.
Right, and it's a lot more immersive that way. But again, you do kind of lose the feeling of I'm getting better at icon fights.
Yeah, right.
Because because it's like I'm never gonna do an icon fight like that again. So there certainly is a trade-off. I do hope that there is some type of overlap in like controls or some sort of basic mechanics that makes it feel like, okay, this is more like a completely different scenario with like the same fundamentals that are happening, and those underlying fundamentals I can continue to get better at, even though the scenario drastically changes and I have to apply those same skills in a very different way. That's what I'm hoping for as in terms of like how we're going to describe it. So I'm going to skip around a little bit on our outline here, because since we're right there, combat in this game is going to be much more action oriented, even more so than Final Fantasy VII Remake. The battle director, Ryota Suzuki, is known for his work on Devil May Cry 5, Dragon's Dogma, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2, all very highly acclaimed action games. But admittedly, this system is far less Final Fantasy in feel. Aside from FF7R, many Final Fantasy battle systems have had mixed reception since around 12. Would you be okay with the battle system that feels less Final Fantasy as long as you feel like it's high quality combat?
Sure. I like I said a little bit earlier, I still really like Final Fantasy 12, and I still really like Final Fantasy 10 and Final Fantasy 15. I had good times with those games. They're not like bad. Even it's not when I say that it doesn't feel like kind of classic or traditional Final Fantasy genre wise, that doesn't mean that they're bad games or that I didn't enjoy them. And I've kind of moved past this hope or sort of like wish that they'll develop a mainline Final Fantasy that goes back to the command-based system that I grew up with. I'm kind of over that now. It's not happening. Right? So I'm not really concerned about that. I think, as long as the game is enjoyable, why not get excited about that? I mean, it doesn't have to be the same as what it was. In order for it to be something worth playing, in order to be something that I like. Like I said, though, I started a file on Dragon's Dogma a while back. I think you played that a little bit, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I played a few hours of it.
What did you feel?
Interesting. Yeah.
How does it work? Like, what do you think is being? What can we take from that game that would even apply to the style? Is because I don't think it feels like a Devil May Cry in terms of combat. Right?
Yeah, it does not. It is very much an action RPG, but it's totally not like Devil May Cry. So actually, I don't think the gameplay of 16 is going to be nearly as Devil May Cry as people are thinking. I think it's probably going to lean a little bit more Dragon's Dogma on a few things, but I think the flashiness of it is totally Devil May Cry. So it is meant to play a little bit more like Dragon's Dogma and look more like Devil May Cry 5. But
because I haven't played enough Dragon's Dogma, help me understand how it works.
When you did play it, I don't know if you noticed that you have 4 buttons, right? Like your face buttons, and they're always posted kind of like in the bottom right corner of the screen. And you're able to map different things to those face buttons, those different commands, and you're able to do different sorts of combos and stuff. And I don't think the NPC, because they had like a very interesting weird party system there. I don't think that someone in chat says the Dragon's Dogma feels a little bit closer to Souls. I don't know if I would say that, but it definitely, I'm
like,
having a hard time describing it because it's really different.
Is it
really
is it
unique.
more? Have you played Monster Hunter?
I actually haven't, believe it or not. Chat, don't kill me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, this is coming from someone who has not played more than maybe 2 hours of Dragon's Dogma. Okay, I have no idea how it functions. From when I look at it, it looks like almost Monster Hunter-y to me. You can climb the bodies of the enemies, right?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can climb by. Someone in chat is also agreeing with Monster Hunter as a better comparison.
So, yeah, like, I enjoy Monster Hunter quite a lot, and I enjoy Souls quite a lot. Those combat systems feel a little more grounded, particularly like physics-wise, than the floaty nature of a Bayonetta or Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
So if the feel of combat leans more Monster Hunter Souls, which it doesn't look that way to me in the trailers, but if it did, I think I would dig it a lot more.
I kind of agree, actually. I straight up wish that it played more like Souls. I know Final Fantasy people are gonna kill me for saying that, but yeah, they're gonna kill me. But I would be like, yo, if it played like more like a Soulsborne game, I'd totally be all over it. Not that it would have to be like as hard as like a Soulsborne game, but like if it had like the weighted feeling and the precision required to play like, a Soulsborne game, I totally.
Well, here's where I think we can have an olive branch that you extend to FF fans, right? So when we say having a Soulsborne feel or a Monster Hunter feel, you can make the combat faster because those games, the combat feels weighty and a little slower. But something like Neo, right, which is, the same developer who made Strangers of Paradise, which I don't have the best beat on the pulse of the Final Fantasy community anymore, but people seem to like the combat in that game, right?
Yeah, they did.
FF fans alike all seemed to kind of like Strangers of Paradise. Essentially what we're saying is something that feels a little more Strangers of Paradise than Devil May Cry. And maybe there's a spectrum between that, right? You can still have some of the flash, but I'm talking about like how it feels to hit something. How it feels to dodge and move, how it feels to fight multiple enemies at once. I lean in my preference more towards that sort of Neo, Souls, Strangers of Paradise sort of feel to combat than I do towards Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and games of that nature. Right. So, I don't know, I guess we'll see how that goes, but considering this guy did Devil May Cry 5 and Dragon's Dogma, who knows really? But the way that it appears to me when I look at it and I see, because another thing that kind of annoys me about, I guess, the character action Devil May Cry style is there's so much flash and there's so much like constant like just unbelievable damage being done visually, but like the enemy's health bar went down that far, you know what I mean? You hit this guy like 10,000 times, did 17,000 flips, and like sent 50,000 shards of metal through its face, and like it did like that much. It just like did like chip damage, right? Like and there's numbers flying everywhere, thousands of damage.
Yeah.
To me, it begins to feel like diminishing returns. The power level of the character is almost completely ambiguous. Like it just, I can't get a sense for like who's what what the level of power really means. You know what I mean? Right. That's not like the best way of describing what I'm thinking. I'm not being as articulate as I wish I could. No.
I completely understand exactly.
So when I see Final Fantasy XVI's combat and I see numbers flying around the screen like that's kind of where I'm at in terms of how I look at that. It's like, oh, I wonder if Clive will feel from the second I control him like the most powerful character I've ever seen in my life. But like, who can. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
right.
You don't get a sense for growth that is visually shown in the way that you really felt the sense of growth in an RPG from an older game where you went from level 1 to level 50 or level 70 or 80 or 90 or max level or whatever, where you really see the huge difference in power. Character action games like Devil May Cry, it's harder for me to kind of see that like growth or like progression in power level when the character from the very start is flipping around the screen and just like tearing things to shreds visually, even if we're talking about not like the numbers mechanics underneath the hood. I'm talking about visually. It's hard to like distinguish the difference in how far a character has come when they're so flashy right from the start. Right. Now, who's to say that the level of flash, I guess, in Clive's abilities won't progress at a rate that makes sense in the final game. I'm just expressing a kind of a general sort of opinion about how that's generally handled.
Right.
But I guess you wait and see how it's handled in the final game. But
right, because there is still a lot that has been left a mystery. We haven't seen, even now, which is crazy, we really haven't seen that much gameplay from this game across all three. Right. Before the Revenge trailer came out, we only had 1 minute of total gameplay across all three of the trailers, and so they've actually been very secretive about combat in this game. It leads me to believe that there is probably a lot more to it than just it being like a very typical hack and slash. I'm sure that there is a lot more to it, and that because Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, those are more character action games, and this is an RPG. I'm sure that the actual RPG focus and that those elements will carry over into battle, and probably a lot more mechanically to it than what we could just glean from the surface of it in these short little trailer gameplay clips. So hopefully, and this is what everyone's been wanting, because it's hard to believe that we're only 6 months out from the release of this game, and it's the least that we've ever known about a Final Fantasy game. I mean, normally 6 months before release, we've already seen the ending. Of the game. Right. That's true. In an official trailer, not even a leak. That's That's Square just puts the ending in there for no reason. So while we're on the broader topic of the gameplay design, and then we'll talk about story stuff, but let's talk about the world design. Okay. Yoshida and Takai have shifted away from open world exploration in favor of a more wide linear structure. That is to say, there are still large zones to explore, but it's all still driven by a linear story and a linear gameplay loop, as opposed to something like FF15 or any large-scale AAA open-world game. Not to say that it's not anything like that, because Yoshida has said, "We found in our extensive user research that many of the younger generation of gamers have never played a Final Fantasy or don't have any interest in the series. It's true. I've tried to show my nephew Final Fantasy, and he's just like, I don't give a f***. I'm going back to Fortnite." To create a game that might excite and resonate not only with our core fans, but also with that new generation, we played a lot of games ourselves. And so, yes, in Final Fantasy XVI, you'll find inspiration from recent AAA open world RPGs. However, to bring a story that feels like it spans an entire globe and beyond, we decided to avoid an open world design that limits us to a single open world space, and instead focus on an independent area-based design that can give players a truly global scale. Do you find this to be a reasonable statement? And how do you feel about this philosophy?
Well, from a philosophy side of things, I've kind of been saying something similar for a long time about open worlds. I think particularly when FF15 came out, I think I made a video about like why open worlds feel small to me or something like that.
Yeah, you did. It was a great video.
And it's not a perfect video. It's not a perfect argument, but I think it was a good conversation starter about the abstractions and how abstractions help scale in ways that like I guess the more you remove abstractions, I guess I should explain what I mean by that. So, in traditional Final Fantasy games, when you reach the overworld map, you have like a giant, character in terms of scale walking around on the map, and they're as tall as the mountains or the towns themselves, right? Now, you're not meant to take from that your character literally grew in size and ran around as a giant and then shrank down in size to go inside of the town. The idea is to give you an abstract way of showing a distance traversed. So it's supposed to give the feeling that you're going many, many miles, even though you've only walked 30 seconds to the next town, right? So that's an abstraction. And games used to be full of abstractions of this kind to get across ideas, rather than actually making you traverse 3 days across, a wasteland to reach, which is what the characters are doing. The characters in the story are traveling many, many days across the world, right? But that's boring, and they're not going to be encountering enemies every, 10 seconds along the way. So it's like you traveled 10 miles and you reached an enemy encounter and you had a fight. And then you went another 15 miles. You know what I mean?
Right.
Maybe a whole day of travel again before you found another enemy encounter. So these abstractions existed to, condense the time it would really take to travel that far, but still give the sense that you did. And I really appreciate abstractions a lot. I kind of miss them. And the more that games have strived for realism, kind of the less abstractions you tend to find in games. And so open world games try to give the sense, and they do. I mean, they're very, very huge maps, and they're very impressive technologically in a lot of ways. But when you put a map of Skyrim up, say even just in the city that I live in, the city I live in is bigger than the entire continent or country or whatever you want to call it of Skyrim. Now, the counterpoint to that is that there is still a sense of abstraction. Time passes faster when you're playing an open world game, right? Like a minute is not a real time minute. It's a minute passes way faster in the game. So there are still abstractions there. But I think the point is that I like zones, and I like zone construction as sort of the in-between of the traditional overworld map and an open world, like a true open world, where you can have these brilliant, amazing, huge areas, but you still have exit points that sort of like give you the sense, oh, the party has now traveled many miles off screen, and they've now arrived at this other area of the world that can look very different, be designed in a different way, give you a sense that you're in a new place, a totally different climate,
right?
Or whatever.
And different biomes is something that like open world games, they do kind of struggle with, because you don't really get that many different biomes as you would in like a zone-based game, right?
Or like you'll get a transition to a biome in like a matter of seconds. It's like just 5 seconds ago I was over here in the forest, and now I'm like in a desert,
right?
And I transitioned between those things really quickly. So again, I enjoy open world games quite a lot, actually. I just recently kind of booted up and replayed a little bit of Breath of the Wild, and I think it's an excellent game. I love open world games. I'm not like trying to say they're bad. I'm just saying abstractions are something that I feel like we're seeing less of as games strive for realism in the AAA space. So to hear that they're kind of going to that, what do they call it? Wide linearity. Wide linearity.
Yeah,
I like that. I think the first Xenoblade Chronicles game was a really good example of that sort of style of map creation. I loved Xenoblade. It felt enormous. The world felt enormous, despite not being every area connected, despite that there were loading screens in between exit points. So I'm a big fan of that style. I like Final Fantasy XII's approach. I like Xenoblade Chronicles 1's approach. So I think that's a good decision. I like that decision.
Yeah, I feel very similar to you. I feel like most of the times in a lot of open world games, very few exceptions. Elden Ring would probably be one because Elden Ring's map is so mind-bogglingly huge. It's just
huge.
Yeah, it's insanely huge. But for the most part, in a lot of open world games, it feels like you're on like a really big island.
Yeah,
and or not even necessarily like a big island. Like if it was small to like one to one, yeah, it'd be like a small island with like a lot of just stuff like close together, right? Yeah. I feel like, especially with this game too, where they have 6 different kingdoms, and I don't know to what extent we're going to be able to explore all those 6 different kingdoms, but we will be going to all of them at least once, apparently, according to the interviews. That they are going to be fleshed out locations, right? And I do feel like area-based design, as he describes it here, is something that's going to allow me to believe that there is a believable amount of distance between, say, the Iron Kingdom and Sambrique and Rosaria and these other different kingdoms that makes it feel like, you know, Rosaria is not just like 500 feet from like Sambrique, and I'm just like, you know, which is like, and I feel like because if you have that in open world, it feels really weird. Like, how am I supposed to believe that these are 2 independent kingdoms? And yeah, it's really just 2 castles like in the middle of like an island, right? So I don't, exactly. And also I kind of feel like it's not Square Enix's strong suit, really, necessarily, to open worlds, right? It's not what this team has been doing. It's definitely not what Creative Business 1 has been doing. So I feel like, you know, do what you do best. If this is the type of game that you know that you can create and tell the story that you want to tell and make it feel the way that you want to make it feel, and I think that's the best way to be. You know, there's no point of trying, like, we have to do open world because the rest of the industry is going to do, like, wants open world from us, right?
Yeah, sure.
I don't like them being put in that position, and it's a position that Square, I feel like, has been put in quite a few times, and it's never something that makes the game turn out good. I'll tell you right now, I think 15 probably would have been a much stronger title if it actually was linear, and if it actually did focus on, you know, smaller areas and stuff like that. If we actually got to see, if we got to see more of Altissia, if we got to see more of Tenebrae, where Luna is from, or you know, the people that were there in Niflheim before they all turned into demons.
I'm pretty sure that's how Versus 13 was originally intended to be designed. Probably something more along the lines of Kingdom Hearts levels or something like that, right? Where probably. But it's like an area you go into, and they're pretty linear, but they like open up in certain places for combat or whatever. Right. But you know, got changed along the way. So
so nothing we can really do about that, unfortunately. But I do wish that things had turned out that way for that game. And who knows what CBU 1 is going to do for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because they're going to be opening up onto the world map with that game.
Have they said that's going to be open world yet, or are they not? They have really not given a comment.
Nope.
All right.
So
I'd be surprised. I'd be real surprised.
I don't think that will be open world. Yeah.
Based on the what's his name, the director of FF13,
Motomu Toriyama.
Yeah. Based on his track record with as a director and the way he likes to design worlds and tell stories, I'd be real surprised if it was an open world game.
I would be too.
Not saying it can't happen. I'd just be surprised.
Yeah, but I think if they go with wide linearity for that game, that'd probably be a better approach than
for sure.
trying to create an open world, especially if they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And doing it on such a title that's so high risk. So let's talk about some story stuff, because I think that's the story is really what interests me with this game.
Okay.
So I want to start by asking you, how do you feel about the game, especially what it's teasing story-wise, you know, after having seen that trailer? Has it shifted things in a positive way for you, especially after having kind of experienced Final Fantasy burnout?
There's not really much well, maybe this is. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of channels, maybe even including yours out there, who have been able to draw on a lot of what has been shown to kind of. But I mean, it seems like the kind of the main thrust of the story is each country has kind of these mother crystals, right?
Yeah.
Which sort of support their dying, or they're like kind of slowly being drained, and without them, they can't survive. The Earth can't survive.
Right.
So you've got that's a very FF kind of like motif to have as sort of your center plot detail, I guess. The crystals diminishing. So I like that. So of course these different nations are going to be at war with each other over resources and trying to survive over what's left of these mother crystals. Right. So, solid, very FF sort of story premise there. Yeah. I think what'll interest me more is what they do in terms of the characters. I know that they've said things. I'm pretty sure I saw a tweet from you, quote, where you're saying it's about kind of people learning that life is not so kind. Yeah, or something along those lines,
growing up and realizing that life isn't kind to you.
It's that kind of thematic content, and how that's going to be executed that will probably be what'll like be most interesting to me. I guess like what I'm most looking forward to seeing is how they handle that. Now, of course, I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV's expansions, so I haven't really seen how they've tackled some of that heavier sort of a thematic material in those games. But the way that it's praised by people in my Discord, by you, by other people I know, I certainly have confidence that they can do it and that they can pull it off and that it would. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't really have any reservations that the story will be good. I feel pretty confident that in at least that. Right. Yeah. And that it's going for a tone that I like, an art style that I like, a story and sort of thematic emphasis that I like. So I think that side of things will be done well. I feel pretty confident in that.
Yeah, thematically, it's really interesting too, because the icons, according to Yoshi P, are supposed to represent weapons of mass destruction, right? And he likened the mother crystals and ether to oil. Right, so this is going to be a very interesting commentary about war in general, and revenge too, because Clive is going to be a very revenge-focused character. I think that his character setup is really interesting. What do you think about how they're going to be doing covering Clive's life? So I don't know if you know this, but the game starts out and Clive is in his teens. And then by the time that you're in the meat of the game, Clive is like around 30.
So there's like 3 time periods, right, that they're covering?
Yeah.
One in his teens, one in his 20s, one in his 30s kind of thing?
Yeah.
Well, I actually really like that. And I'm hoping that it will be, well, I'm actually really confident that it will essentially be what I was hoping to get out of Final Fantasy 15. Because I knew they were going to do that in that game, but they kind of just did a big time skip. And then you just basically fought the final dungeon as the older version of Noctis. And I was kind of hoping that they would, do that transition a little earlier, and you'd spend more time as the older character in the dark world kind of thing, right?
Right.
So I like it. I think it'll be like a more fully realized version of what I was hoping they were going to do in that game. It reminds me a little bit of, say, like the Assassin's Creed games, which, Assassin's Creed as a series is kind of a meme at this point. But it's kind of, I know it's not like the greatest series of all time, but I did really enjoy watching, gosh, I'm so bad with names. What is wrong with me? Ezio. Yeah. Ezio sort of grow up. I think that was kind of one of the most enjoyable things about that particular trilogy of Assassin's Creed games, right? The Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, and Revelation, was seeing that character age and grow over time. I really like stories that do that, where we're not just going to see our character go through, a few weeks or a few months process where they conquer whatever conflict they have going on. They're going to have to deal with loss over time. It's going to change them. They're going to really grow and change over many, many, many years. I really like that as a concept. So I'm actually pretty excited about that particular aspect of the story. I think it's going to be cool to see.
Yeah, I think it's really cool too. There was like that dramatic moment from the trailer where Clive was like, 13 years I've waited for this moment. I refuse to die today. Yeah, I was like, ooh, I really like that.
There's a lot of potential in that for like a really, really heavy hitting payoff, right? If you can really give the sense that the player has been on a journey with this character for a huge portion of this character's life, maybe even half this character's life or something close to it. You can execute on that and really deliver that sense. Then when the stakes will just feel so massively huge and impactful to the player. That's what a story of this kind has the potential of delivering, which is why I'm kind of excited about it. Because when you have that level of attachment to someone, it's real different when you've been with someone for years versus you've been with someone for a few weeks, right? If you can really get us attached to that character on that level, the stakes will be huge, and that's there's a potential for a payoff there, right? That would just like really hit hard, and I think that's probably what I'm most hopeful about with the story, is that moment when it comes, I will feel like I've been there with that character the whole way, and I understand the stakes from the same perspective as the character. That's what I felt like I was missing from 15. I don't feel like I was with Noctis. I really knew Noctis in the way I needed to, that I knew his father in the way I needed to, for that sacrifice at the end to really hit me the way I think they wanted it to.
Right.
So if I can feel like that with Clive, like that's what I'm hoping they can do.
Yeah, I feel that too. And like, man, with 15, I just wish they just did just even a little bit more with Noctis and Regis's relationship in terms of showing, like, you know, some scenes. And they even teased them in like Platinum demo. But I'm like, man, if you would have just brought more of that into the main game, I think I would have broke down, like cry really hard during some of those moments, because dude, I'm a big sucker for any like father-son relationship story. And God of War has really hit that for me in like a really good way. But I'm excited to see if 16 can sort of hit that too. But and we'll see.
I felt the same way. It was like about 15 in particular. A lot of the trailers sort of, they seemed to promise this, you know, nuanced, deep, sort of troubled relationship between Regis and Noctis, and Regis knowing what he's preparing Noctis to do and the conflict he's having over that. And then Regis appears in the game for almost nothing. And I feel like that was a real disappointment for me. And so without that sort of foundation of the relationship between father and son, there were several moments in the game that just didn't land the way that it felt like it meant to. Like when he finds out that his father died, when that very last scene of the game back in the castle again, you know, as Regis turns his back and can't watch as Noctis is attacked by the other kings, you know. Those moments are the moments that need to like really deliver, and I feel like if you can keep me with Clive for 15, 20 years, whatever it's going to be, and make me really feel like I've been with him, I know him that well, then you'll be in a good place to have a payoff like that. Right,
especially when it's also not just him, but there's, you know, Jill, for example, that's the silver-haired girl who's the dominant of Shiva, and she also, you know, kind of grows up with him as well. And I think that stuff like that is going to make their relationship feel very intimate in a way that you may not see too often in a lot of JRPGs, which I'm really excited for as well. And then also, I'm just really excited for the dog, man. the backstory on the dog is like really interesting, right? Because basically after like Rosaria gets like conquered, because Clive has the dog as like a puppy. And they kind of hinted that maybe the dog is like, mystical in some sense. I'm sure that the dog has some other backstory to it as well. Some people have even speculated that the dog could be like the dominant of Fenrir, which I think would actually be like a really cool twist.
That'd be interesting.
But anyway, the dog gets separated from Clive for like 10 years. And then he finds his way back to Clive. Yeah. And so, that's just in his bio. And so I'm just imagining this really emotional reunion between Clive, who has basically, lost his entire kingdom. They've kind of teased that essentially Clive becomes like a slave in like his 20s, and that's why he has that branding on his face, is that he basically becomes a slave for Sambrick. And at least I think it was Sambrick. I can't remember, but yeah, he becomes a slave, and he bears that mark on his face. To show that he is one, and to have just that emotional reunion with the dog, man. I think that there is set up for moments like that can be like, it can pay off tremendously as long as they don't botch the setup for it, which which
I mean, what reason do we have to doubt that they would,
right,
based on the work they've done? So
okay, let's move on to the next one. In addition to Final Fantasy XVI's approach to development has also been really interesting. According to Yoshi P, he has said that Final Fantasy XVI, they did not begin development on the game until they were absolutely confident they were telling the story they wanted to tell and can lock it down without making significant changes. Being very knowledgeable about development of Final Fantasy games, do you feel like this is a good approach compared to FF titles, past and present, particularly with 13 and 15?
Yes. That being said, there's not really like a wrong way. Well, I'm sure there's many wrong ways. What I mean to say is having a gameplay system you develop first and then writing a story that supports that is not like a wrong approach to game design either, right? But the reason why I say yes to the question is because from the beginning, that's kind of what Final Fantasy was. Well, yes and no. Like, there's the famous quote from Sakaguchi where he says, I don't think I have what it takes to make an action game. I think I'm better at telling a story, right? But those first, NES Final Fantasy games were not like super character-driven, like story-focused things. They were more like D&D sort of campaigns where they were really more focused around the character development systems. But Sakaguchi ended up being mentored. I talk about this a little bit in the Fantasian video that I did a little while back. This is, my audience knows this. I'm horrible at remembering names. So if I don't have like a person's name in front of me, I will forget it. But he was like the lead editor of a famous manga, that like, it was like a magazine that would publish like lots of different manga stories.
I know the magazine was probably Shonen Jump.
Yes, Shonen Jump, that's the one. So like the lead editor of Shonen Jump, Sakaguchi met with him, and he was mentored by him in terms of like learning how to tell stories better. And this is kind of where the focus of Final Fantasy from 4 onward started to shift more onto, telling stories with really strong characters, right? And it was a pioneer a little bit, FF4, in terms of how it approached doing that for games. And so the identity of Final Fantasy from that point onward was kind of more of a story-first focus. So I think it's the right move for this series to start with your story and build a game around supporting what that story is. So, yeah, I mean, that's. I guess if I were to become a game designer, which is not going to happen, but if I were, that would kind of be my approach to it too. I would want to tell stories with my games, and so I'd probably write a story first and then try to develop a gameplay system that supports the story rather than the other way around.
Right.
But neither approach is the right approach. It's just like what are you trying to do with your game? Are you trying to tell a story? Are you trying to I don't know, make a really, really awesome combat system? Are you trying to give a sense of exploration? Like, what's the real core of the experience about? And if core of the experience is supposed to be storytelling, then I'm excited for it, because that's what I tend to favor. So
right, and then also, the fact that this story was locked down early in development, and they say that it has not changed much throughout the course of development, right? Which I find to be really interesting when you look at recent Final Fantasy titles, which have undergone, so much change. And 13 was one of those. 15 kind of being like the greatest defender of all of them. I mean, completely changing the entire concept, story, gameplay, every single facet you can possibly conceive, other than the character designs, were essentially changed, and they kind of took the aesthetics of Versus 13 and Frankenstein in an entirely new story. So it is comforting to see that with the past two major single player titles, that they've decided to lock down something that they can really believe in while working, right? Especially, you think even with 13, where they said, that we had entirely, we were having debates on what this game was even going to be, like leading up into the demo. Yeah. And then once we made the demo, we knew what the game was supposed to be, right? So
going forward, they kind of finally all got on board with it. Yeah.
Right. So what Yoshi P says, or how he started the development of this game, is that he only tasked like 4 people to work on the game.
That's a really good way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. He said and then he basically was like, we're not expanding until you 4 figure out exactly what it is that we're going to make.
Yeah.
And then we're going to add in more people, right?
This really just kind of speaks to good management. Yeah. And I feel like Final Fantasy has lacked that a little bit with some of its previous projects. I think they've had good artists in place, good creators, really talented people, but not necessarily good managers of people kind of in place to lead projects. And that's why you've seen such long development times. That's why you've seen such like a mess in terms of like all the drama behind the scenes for a lot of these games. It seems to me that perhaps Yoshi P's greatest strength is his management skills. This actually, what you just told me about just assigning 4 people to like nail down. I mean, that's just the fact that the game's development has not changed much, or like they haven't had these wide swings in direction over the course of the game. It means that they did their job in pre-production. Like when you really lock down a pre-production, you do a lot of really good planning. That's exactly what happens. You have a smooth development cycle, or a smooth production, say on a film, right? If you do the work and you do it right in pre-production before you actually begin working on it, then everyone's on the same page and you're able to sort of like move that way and everyone's on board. And that has not been the case on previous FF projects. So I think that this is a testament to the strength of Yoshida's his people skills, his managerial skills.
Right.
And I think that has been evident ever since he took on the disaster that was Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 and turned that around, right? Like that's just a strong management. So that's really good to hear. That means that you probably won't see a lot of the same criticism of 16 that you saw for games like 15 or 13, where it's like, this feels a little bit like a mess. Like, I don't, it seems to me like I think of anything we've talked about today, that's the strongest indicator that this game will be solid. Right. That it will be well designed, that it will be a very strong, polished experience. Is that they're not having a lot of trouble behind the scenes during development because they thought it all through at the beginning. And even on the original Final Fantasy, the very, very first one, Hironobu Sakaguchi and some of the other developers were working on Rad Race or something like that, or 3D World Runner. I can't remember which game, but they were still kind of finishing up one of those titles. And Ishii was assigned to work by himself on FF1 and begin the planning stages. And he was the one that came up with so many of the concepts, like the first dungeon, the end dungeon being a return to the first, the final boss being the same as the first boss, airship vehicles making it kind of look like a diorama, you know, like giving that sort of perspective as it sort of flies up and you kind of see the shadow on the ground. He came up with a lot of the concepts that would sort of shape what that experience became. And so then when the others came on, right, and he designed all the characters. Of course, Shibuya did the pixel art, but he even talks about how he went in and like changed her pixel art behind her back because it wasn't like what he wanted, you know. So when you have one person or a small team of people who get together and really make those decisions on sort of like the direction that this thing is going to go, and then everyone comes on board and they go, okay, that's it, that's what we're going to do, everyone, then, you know, development will go smoothly. And that seems to not have been the case recently for these big projects they've been putting out. So that's really a good thing to hear.
And not only does development go smoothly, but also there tends to be a stronger sense of vision, I feel like.
Yes.
Whenever it starts off with a smaller team, right? It's more concentrated. They know exactly what it is that they are trying to build, right? Versus when I feel like when you start with hundreds of people on a project and everybody has their own ideas about what it is that they kind of want to make. And what tends to happen on those productions, from what I've seen, is that it seems like as time goes along, then everybody kind of gets on, you know, the same page as things become more fleshed out, and as the team starts to build more concepts and more prototypes, and they're able to really figure out what they're trying to develop, and then people get on track. Again, 13 would be like a great example where they said at one point in 13 that half of the assets they produced during development didn't get used. Because they didn't know what they were trying to develop, right? And they said
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, so that's how bad it was, right?
Yeah.
And they were really mismanaged during the development of that game. And so, I mean, this is one of the reasons that 13.2 and Lightning Returns and all those games happened too, because they were sitting on so many assets that it only made sense to continue to make something, because they had already spent so much money developing the game and the engine and all those other things, and they were already in deep. So
yeah,
why not try to, you know, make something else to continue to profit? Sure. That's only good business, right? So that is, you know, kind of the problem that Square in particular has been having with developing these titles, is, I guess you could really say, just really bad upper management, not making the best calls that they could. I completely agree with you that I don't think that there has ever been a Final Fantasy game that didn't have pretty much an entire dev team of some of the most talented people in the entire world, right? Because if you look at, I mean, even some of the like less, like not as well received Final Fantasies like 13 or 15, like if you really look into like some of the designs and some of the ideas behind them, they're really cool and they're really creative, right? Like I don't think that there has ever been a Final Fantasy that was completely built on just bad ideas through and through. Not a mainline title, right?
Never.
So they've all had something behind them that was like really incredible, and it's just usually when they tend to fall short in like the general public eye. If you read into what happened during development, there is always a very fascinating story about something that happened in upper management. Someone's decision to use such and such engine falling apart in the middle of development having to be paused because the engine's not ready. People having disagreements about what the game is even supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this even applies to 7 Remake, right? They had that other development studio, CC2 or whatever they were called.
Yeah, CyberConnect 2.
Then they worked on it for what, 2 years?
Yeah,
and then they brought it back in house. They just scrapped whatever they were doing and kind of like restarted again.
Yeah,
and then we hear about Kitase wanting to push it further and further away from being like a true sort of remake of the original story and more a sequel kind of thing. That's what Nomura not really agreeing with that, and not being on board with the vision. The two guys at the top, the director and the producer. That leads to troubling development. So. Not to say that FF7 Remake isn't polished. I think it was a very polished experience, much more so than Final Fantasy 15 was. But it's just another example of particularly that business unit kind of struggling to get on board together from the get-go. And I think that leads to some of the divisiveness you see in the reception. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, and that's a really good sign.
Yeah. I think so too. Chat, I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you guys want to get your questions in, please go ahead and send those now. Are we doing good for time, man?
Yeah, I'm totally good. Like I said, I have the next while off of work. I think what I'm going to do today after this is just kind of get on recording that FF1 retrospective again and preparing. So that's what I'm going to be doing after this. So I've got time.
Awesome. Sweet. And also, you guys, please be sure to like highlight them so that it's easier for me to like scroll back through. I've been taking down a couple of them while we've been going. So this is the last one for me. And I think your take on this will be pretty fascinating. But with this story, Naoki Yoshida said that he wanted to make the game M-rated, not just for the sake of showing explicit scenes, but specifically because the team felt that Squares often had to compromise scenes due to age rating restrictions. A good example of this could be Final Fantasy VII Remake's Blood Trail, which they've actually explicitly said in the Ultimania that they had to change it due to the age rating restrictions. They couldn't show copious amounts of blood, basically, in a teen-rated game.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on this approach? This being the first M-rated Final Fantasy mainline title, as well as a darker Final Fantasy game in general.
That's actually a really tough question. Tougher than I thought it was going to be, because this is one of the ones that I did skim through before coming on with you today. And of course, my gut reaction is to say it's great. It's a wonderful thing, because that was my favorite scene from the Midgar arc, was the Trail of Blood.
Mine too. Yeah.
It was far and away my favorite, most impactful scene from the original game, and to see it kind of changed the way it was in 7 Remake was a big disappointment for me. But won't get into that too much. But so yeah, I mean, you don't want to limit the type of story you're wanting to tell, but if I guess they're just assuming their audience is not kids for this one, and that's kind of one of the charming things about Final Fantasy in the past was, you could enjoy it whether you were 10 or an adult or whatever age, you know what I mean? Though it's kind of funny, they got away with a lot of things on the PlayStation 1, I feel like, that they can't anymore.
Yes, they did.
There are certain things that, whether it's violence or innuendos or whatever from these PlayStation 1 games, whether it's Metal Gear Solid or Final Fantasy VII or whatever, that it's like it really rode that line of what was appropriate for kids. But I was a kid, I played it, I thought it was great. So there's a part of me that kind of is like, oh man, maybe kids aren't going to be able to enjoy this, and that's the age I was when I was introduced to Final Fantasy, and that's a little bit of a shame. But I guess the more important thing really is that they're not going to be tiptoeing around or trying to be careful about what they can and can't show. They'll just go, into the deep end and be able to just express exactly what they want to with the story. And, it seems like rated M games are usually the highest selling games in the world for the most part. Is Fortnite's a T-rated game, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Might even be E-rated, honestly.
Maybe it is E. I would think T.
I would think you're right. It's got to be T. It's got to be T.
How could you? Yeah, I'm thinking, how can you have like people shooting guns at each other and have anything lower than T? But
split.
That's true. But that no one's dying. Yeah. I guess it's just paint, right? But,
yeah.
Anyway, there's a part of me that's like, I guess if I had a kid, I would love to enjoy the next Final Fantasy game with my kid or something like that. Good friend of mine, she grew up playing Final Fantasy with her father when she was a kid. There's that aspect of it I feel like you might miss this way, but I think that's a footnote, a minor thing. In the more important thing is that they're able to make the game that they want to without compromise. So
yeah. And I think that they're doing some pretty interesting stuff with it, right? I mean, in the trailer, they had a sex scene, or what they teased. I'm sure they're not going to actually like show it. It was in the Dominance trailer, but they showed two characters without clothes.
Oh, in bed together?
Yeah, in bed together.
See, I wondered if that would be something more like, have you played Xenogears?
No, I haven't. Chat, don't kill me.
You should. It's
Mike,
awesome.
don't kill me.
Just like a conversation that happens between two characters that are in bed together. I don't know if they'll actually show the sex itself, right. Like show them kissing or show them rolling around.
I doubt they will.
Whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But, imply that these characters are together and they're having a conversation in bed, wake up in the middle of the night or whatever it might be, Yeah. I assume it'd probably be more of that than the former. But,
Chat is pissed at me.
They're pissed at you for not playing Xenogears?
Yeah.
You gotta play it, man. You gotta play it.
Okay. I guess I know what the next game we'll be playing on stream is. Everyone's
play Xenogears. Play Xenogears.
Everyone's like,
you
bro,
must play Xenogears.
Yes, then I can enjoy your 1,000 episode series.
It's definitely by far the longest and most in-depth podcast we have. Series is on Xenogears, so it's 21 episodes long with an average length of I think like 2+ hours per episode. So it's a bit insane. It's probably a little too much, but
I'm gonna do it.
It's a lot to talk about. A lot to talk about with that game.
Yeah. Someone send me a legal backup of the game, since I cannot purchase the game from Square Enix. Square Enix, please publish the game.
Do you still have a working PS2 somewhere?
Probably not.
Well, I would say I could mail you my copy, but if you don't have a PS1 or PS2,
I don't even have a disc drive on my PC, so I could play it like.
Yeah, that was the other part. It's like you could emulate with a disc, but most computers don't have disc drives these days. So.
I know, man, dude. I used to take like PS1 emulators and just straight up stick like the CDs in like my computer back in the day.
You just put the actual game in your computer and emulate it. That's the legal way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I would do that all the time.
Yeah, man, those were the days, dude.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to some of the questions. One of them I caught from the Hylian.
What's up, Hylian? I know who this is.
Let me see this one. Perhaps you guys have gone over this, but what are you guys' takes on how Final Fantasy XVI's success could impact CBU1's creative direction? And would you live with Yoshi P's FF despite it still not being stylistically like Sakaguchi? I'll give you my take on this first. Okay. I don't think that 16's success would impact CBU1's anything because I feel like CBU1 is like their legacy members. And even if Final Fantasy XVI sells like 1 trillion copies, like like those guys have such veteran status for how many, the tremendous number of successes that they've had, that I don't think that anything that they do will ever impact it, right? Because they have seniority, and that matters a lot, especially in Japan. Yes. And yeah, so, and also Final Fantasy VII Remake did really well, so I don't think that anything will negatively impact them.
The brand is almost too big to fail at this point. So, and there's a huge swath of FF fans that are they align more with the CB U1 philosophy.
Yeah, a lot of them won't even look at 16.
Like I said, I don't really like have a finger on the pulse of like the FF community anymore. But, based on some tweets I've seen from you, it seems like a lot of people are like criticizing Final Fantasy XVI, which, they're the Nomura Kitase fans, right? So, I think that they're always going to have their sort of fan base that will eat up what they make, and so FF16's success probably won't have much effect at all on Creative Business Unit 1, but.
It's the result of what happens when you kind of split up the visions for any series, right? When you have two different teams and studios working on one series, it's just a natural byproduct that there is going to be fans of one studio and fans of another, and of course there will also be fans of both, right? Sure. I still like a lot of CVU1 stuff. They don't always make things that I fully agree with, but I still really enjoyed Remake, right? Despite maybe not necessarily agreeing with it from a storytelling perspective, for example.
Sure.
But I do see myself as, a fan of both in many senses, especially with the legacy that CVU1 has behind them. But I am interested to see what CVU3 is going to do differently than CVU1. For sure. Yeah.
And as for like the second part of that question, accepting, I think you said something like accepting Yoshida's sort of like vision for Final Fantasy, even if it doesn't align so much with Sakaguchi's. I think it would be unreasonable to expect that it ever would in the first place. Like this is like expecting any Disney Star Wars to feel like a George Lucas Star Wars, or you know what I mean? Like every single creator who heads a production for Star Wars now, they have a different take on it and a different feel. Like I guess a lot of people really love this new Andor show, right? It seems to have won a lot of people over. Who's a very different sort of showrunner than some of the other stuff we've seen, of course, J.J. Abrams or some of these other directors. So, everyone's going to have their own mark, their own style, their own way of doing things. And so you can't really expect Final Fantasy by Naoki Yoshida to feel like Final Fantasy by Hironobu Sakaguchi. And even on that point, a single creator can change themselves in major ways over the course of their career. I feel like George Lucas's original Star Wars trilogy feels a lot different than his prequel Star Wars trilogy. And he changed a lot as a creator over, the 30 years that it was in between those two things. So, even Sakaguchi's work, there's some of it I don't like. Like, I wasn't a very big fan of Fantasian, to be honest. I really didn't like the game at all. I still respect what they were trying to do. I think that there was a lot of really interesting ideas there. I interviewed him regarding that game and asked him a lot of questions and really appreciated his time, like coming on and talking to me, but I didn't like the game. I don't like Blue Dragon. I don't like Final Fantasy Spirits Within. Like, there's a lot of work that he's done that I don't think is very good. So, by no means should we put anyone on a pedestal and treat them as if they're infallible or something like that as a creator. But at the same time, I really enjoyed kind of the foundation of the Final Fantasy that he sort of created. And I wish that they were able to continue making games that felt like it fit in that sort of design philosophy for me. I guess the closest thing they've got going to that right now are the Bravely Default series, though it's not quite there. I don't enjoy those quite in the same way, but it's close. But yeah, I wouldn't expect or even want Naoki Yoshida to attempt to make a Hironobu Sakaguchi Final Fantasy. I don't think he could, and I don't think anybody could. So, do what you are good at, play to your own strengths. Right. And that's really all you can expect.
And adding on to that too is Sakaguchi, who has also been a really, really big fan of 14. I don't know if you've been to Sakaguchi's Twitter anytime in the past few months.
Particularly when he first started playing. I mean, he's tweeting about it like several times a day. I saw. He'll do some cool things, like he'll kind of recreate scenes from Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy V, with his FF14 characters. It's fun to see how passionate he is about it. Yeah.
So I feel like, if Sakaguchi feels that way about Yoshi P's directorial and producer expertise, then, everyone else should at least give it a shot, right?
Sure.
This one comes from Baby Seal. The buzz around 16 is worrisome, and the lack of engagement on the trailers, it doesn't even break the top 7 most watched trailers from the Game Awards. What could they change about the marketing for this game to get more people involved?
Man, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the collector's edition too didn't sell out as one would have predicted, which is interesting, right?
They've been so long in between trailers. You feel like it almost feels like years go by before you hear anything else about Final Fantasy XVI. I would assume that they would ramp that up quite a bit.
Yeah.
Leading up to the actual release. In the next 6 months, they should be having news, new trailers. I mean, every month or every week, to be honest, like leading up to it within a few months out. If they want to turn that trend around, I just feel like part of it has got to be just the space of time in between announcements. They just haven't been saying a lot about it,
right?
Which, of course, to some degree, we kind of respect, right? That they're not doing what the mistake they've made in the past, which is build this hype for something that you get the game and it's not at all what you expected. Final Fantasy 15 was a huge offender of that with the Omen trailer. The Omen trailer for Final Fantasy 15 was the best thing that came out of that project, in my opinion. That trailer is absolutely brilliant from start to finish. It tells a better story than the game does, and it's not even close. So, what you don't want to have happen is to build an expectation like that trailer did, and then release a game that has almost nothing to do with it. And disappoint people. At the same time, you kind of need to be a little bit more open with sharing information and marketing the game and letting people know what they can expect from the thing, right? We're sitting here speculating on whether the game will feel more like Devil May Cry 5 or more like Dragon's Dogma. That's a question that should be answered well before the game comes out,
right?
So that people know what they're buying. So I would assume that trend will change here shortly. As we get into the new year, I think they'll start releasing a lot more information, a lot more trailers, a lot more advertisements, building up for it. I'm sure that they'll have commercials on TV, that sort of thing. But there is another part of it too, where I do wonder whether the anime and JRPG sort of wider fan base is interested in dark fantasy of this type. More grounded. Feel
like they are, honestly.
I feel like just the character designs themselves. There are certain people who just, and I'm not saying this to speak down to people. I'm really not trying to do that. I'm just trying to kind of be real about what I've observed.
No,
and that is that there are certain people that just they like that kind of more what's mainstream in terms of anime designs, not quite moe. That's not like really the exact right term, but leaning in that direction, the cutesy sort of like huge eyes, there's a certain style of anime that's really popular right now, and I wonder if the crowd that is into that would really have much interest when they look at the characters in Final Fantasy XVI. I find that to be a shame because I like a wide array of styles, whether it's art direction or gameplay or genre or whatever. There's so much great stuff all over that is interesting and really cool and that I want to experience. But some people, they kind of just get locked in. I feel like a lot of, and this is just from, again, I'm only speaking from my personal experience, having struggled with this because I want to make content about something different than, JRPGs, and I see the engagement go way down. And my thought is, like, do you people not have any interest at all in something that's not a JRPG? Like, how can that be? How can that be? Like, how can you not, like, have any interest in anything outside of a single genre? It's just something I've had a hard time kind of getting my head around. But I really do think that there's some people that just, they like what they like. They know what they like. Yeah. And this doesn't fit into that necessarily. It's like adjacent to it, but it's not like exactly what they're looking for. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see if that's the case. I feel like Final Fantasy IX fell into that a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It didn't fit the style of, say, 8 and 7. Not that 8 and 7 were the same style, but they were kind of moving a certain direction with it. And 8 came out, or 9 came out, and you saw kind of a huge drop off in terms of sales. So I wonder if it's a situation that might be something like that. Final Fantasy has built a certain expectation of what it looks and feels like, and maybe fits a little more squarely with kind of what those sort of mainstream anime fans are looking for. And maybe FF16 doesn't quite fit into that in the same way. But we'll see. We'll see. If that's the case, then they need to appeal to the audience that will like it, which is probably more, the Devil May Cry and the maybe even Elder Scrolls or some of those people.
Yeah, I would say more like even like a Witcher
or the Witcher.
Audience.
Because those people are there. I mean, there's plenty of people out there who'd be interested in Final Fantasy 16. Right. You just got to put your marketing material in front of the right people to see it. Yeah. So that's all stuff that's going to be handled by the marketing people at Square Enix in the next 6 months.
So I mean, I'll give you a perfect example, right? Like, I've always been into anime growing up, but my brother, ironically, he was more into like Western comics, and so I would play JRPGs, and he'd play Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and other Western RPGs, and it's just so funny, right? But he never really had much interest in Final Fantasy. But I'll show him, like, every now and then he'll really click with one. Like, he loved FF12, and then he sees FF16, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm really into this." Right? Yeah. But then
I feel like that's the right audience. It's more the Western fantasy, Western RPG fans probably.
Yeah, and then and he'll see those types of Final Fantasy titles, and those will really click with him, right? But then the ones that have more of a anime leaning style. Yeah, it'll just be like, looks cool. Not really as much my taste, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it is not having that explosive appeal yet because it is so, in terms of the story and presentation, like it is an entirely different subgenre than what people have come to expect of Final Fantasy. True. And those people do want something that is more, and see, I don't even want to say anime leaning because I still feel like 16 is anime leaning, but it's not. Instead of shonen, it's more seinen.
Sure.
Right. Sure. It's more berserk. It's more Devilman. It's more along those lines, right? Than say like a super mainstream My Hero Academia type
Claymore,
shonen, right? Yeah,
Claymore, right?
Yeah, and so. Which and it's weird too because for me I'm just like I'm so excited for Final Fantasy to like go in that direction because I feel like because I'm like I'm at that age now where I can really appreciate that stuff on such a profound level, but yeah, I understand that not everyone is going to instantly, look at it and be able to see that. I think that Final Fantasy XVI success is really going to come after the game has launched, and people are going to talk about it. Yeah, and people are going to talk about it, and then it is going to be. But I think it's going to be reviewed really well. All of Yoshi P's games have been reviewed really well. All 14 and all of its expansions are high 80s to 90s. Endwalker had a 92 on Metacritic. Shadowbringers has a 90 on Metacritic. So he tends to do pretty well on the reviews. So I think 16 is gonna review well, and I think the word of mouth will be good, and it'll take off. What are you gonna say?
I mean, I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to get a beat on the scale of the Final Fantasy XIV fandom. I mean, like, how many active players are there? I mean, there's got to be a lot of people there that will play Final Fantasy XVI.
It's very hard to determine that, but I would say like active subscribers right now is probably like, because it's constantly fluctuating. People deactivate and reactivate, but it usually stays somewhere around 2-ish or 3-ish million, I want to say.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So
that's crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And those people are I would think show a lot of interest in what. And I think
I want to say that their total number of accounts is like 30 million. So so there's a huge base, and those people will probably show up for it. So
I would think so.
Yeah, but I think they're going to have slow momentum. I know it sounds weird, but I'm actually glad that the hype's not there yet for the mainstream.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is in my primitive brain that tells me that means it's going to be good, but somehow my brain is just like, my brain is saying, "Oh, that means that this is the one, bro. This is the like the fact that nobody's even noticing it
by surprise."
Because it's the one that can take people by surprise and not have to like come in with heavy expectations, right? Because no one's going into this with very heavy expectations, right?
Yeah, right.
So let's keep moving on the question train. Okay. Let's see. I have a question for Mike, who said that, forgive this that the phrasing isn't accurate, that FF hasn't been FF since Sakaguchi left Square. If 16 has renewed any hope for the team working, his phrasing there was kind of weird. I guess he's saying, like, has there been any renewed hope for Final Fantasy since like what you've seen on 16? And do you like that it's heavily influenced by Matsuno?
I mean, I love Matsuno's games.
Yeah.
We've covered several of them on our podcast. I've made videos about them. Vagrant Story in particular is like near perfection storytelling wise. I really, really enjoy Final Fantasy Tactics. It's one of my very favorite Final Fantasy games. So there's a something about the tone, the kind of the style of story that Matsuno tells, that I can see that influence. I can see the people on the development team of 14 and 16 kind of going in a similar direction. So I'm sure that I will like what it's going for. I guess it remains to be seen in terms of execution, but I don't really have a reason to feel like they would, not deliver. Let's see. Doesn't he ask something about, like, is there a particular person on the team whose work I'm
there was actually someone who asked that. Please go ahead and answer that now then.
So
like that falls under the same umbrella.
I wish I could say yes, but I have not played Final Fantasy XIV, so I don't really know. I'm not really familiar with the work of any of these kind of lead developers on this, so I cannot pick because I don't know. But I guess as a more general blanket sort of like statement on that, story is most important to me, so I guess I'm looking forward to, what's his name, Masahiro? My hero.
Yeah.
I guess whatever I want to see what he's doing with the story. That's kind of the most interesting part about what I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah, there's a really interesting quote from him here. I love to read, and I read a lot from a lot of different authors, but I'd say the number one influence on my work is game designer Yasumi Matsuno. For more than half of my career, I've worked with Matsuno. Originally, I was actually in charge of battle systems, and he was a huge influence for writing and dialogue, in game scenarios. So, that's not to say that he necessarily will be as good, but at least where his inspirations are coming from while he works on this.
When it comes to dialogue, and now I say this not being a Japanese speaker, so mostly I'm kind of relying on some of the style of the translations. Who was the translator on FF12 and Vagrant Story? Tom.
I forget his name.
No, something. Oh my goodness.
I could look this.
Someone in the chat's going to tell me. I'm just waiting for it. I'm waiting for you to see it from them.
Chat, you got
Smith.
it?
Smith. Something O. Smith. Anyway.
Alexander O. Smith.
There he is. Alexander O. Smith. So, a large part of my enjoyment of Matsuno's dialogue, I have to admit, probably comes from Alexander O. Smith. Like, you can't really, understate how much a translator has in terms of influence on what it reads like, in the language it's being translated into. But based on what he has said, what Alexander O. Smith has said in interviews about Matsuno's dialogue is the best dialogue in the Final Fantasy series. The games that he's worked on, whatever we could debate about how good the actual plot is or whatever, or the flaws that might exist, he's by far and away the best at writing dialogue. I don't even think it's close.
Right.
So if they're using that as a reference or as an influence, or if that's Mairo's inspiration, then there's not much better you can find. I assume the dialogue will be pretty good.
Yeah, the dialogue in 14, especially after A Realm Reborn, is really, really good. And My Hero has wrote a lot of that dialogue too, particularly in Heaven's Ward. And he's no longer, the lead scenario writer on it. Natsuko Ishikawa is, and she's really good. She's written the past 2 expansions that have received incredibly good acclaim. She got a standing ovation at PAX for Shadowbringers, where all she did was walk out on stage and just said, "My job was the lead scenario of Shadowbringers." It's such a wholesome clip, and everyone just starts cheering and clapping and just they have to tell the audience. Yeah, so just to give you an idea of how much people really love her work as well. So this team has had a lot of good work, a lot of good luck with their writing staff and how beloved they are. In terms of translation, we have Koji Fox working on. I don't know if you're familiar with Koji Fox.
No, I'm not familiar with him.
He's a really good localizer.
I'm assuming he's worked on 14 as well.
He's worked on 14. I think his first major translation work was Dirge of Cerberus, ironically, which is really, really, really funny.
Not much you can do with that.
Yeah, not much you can do with that. But with 14, I'm sure you've seen from following me on Twitter that there are so many great lines of dialogue that I just routinely pluck out and just post as an inspirational quote. Because of just how beautifully phrased. There is dialogue in there that is damn near poetry, man. It's so well written.
Particularly the villain of that 3rd expansion. What was that one?
Emmett Selk.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, his lines, every single thing that he says is really, really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think of everything that I've seen from FF14, I think what piques my interest the most is that character. I'm interested to see what he's all about. It seems like people think he's a really, really, really well-written villain. So
he's just a well-written character in general. I would probably say that he's my favorite character in the whole series. And I don't say that lightly. But
yeah, seriously.
he has such an incredible backstory. He is definitely one of the war criminals that people love apologizing for in that game.
Oh, shit. There you go.
And it's just like, because up to that point, you're just really led to believe that him and his people are doing the wrong thing, right? And the game makes it very opaque that the Asians are bad. And then in Shadowbringers, because Shadowbringers thematically is kind of about like, it's kind of almost about role reversal, right? So the warrior of light becomes the warrior of darkness, right? Shadows become a good thing. Light becomes the bad thing, right? And so these Asians that you've been fighting this whole time, you get their side of the story. And then as you see Emmett Selk's perspective on all the events that have transpired thus far, you start to think, oh my God. Well then, yeah. And then also...
That's a very Final Fantasy thing too, kind of the balance between light and dark, right?
Right.
Where I think it was even as far back as FF3, you're the light warriors in that one, but the previous heroes before you were the dark warriors who had to battle against the light to bring balance. So that's
funny you mentioned that. So it's actually Shadowbringers is basically inspired by FF3. Actually,
that's exactly.
So that's why. Yeah,
that's why I thought of it.
I'll send you the cinematic trailer later because I think you should watch the cinematic trailer for it because it's really interesting. But Eternal Wind actually plays in the cinematic trailer, and there's actually a crystal tower even, and so Eternal Wind plays and you see the crystal tower, and it's really cool.
That's one of the best pieces of music in the entire series. It might be the best one, Eternal Wind.
It's up there, man. It's so up there. I love Eternal Wind so much. This question here goes back to the mature and darker themes here. Are you afraid of it losing the humor and levity that Final Fantasy is known for?
No, because I'm not expecting it to feel like Final Fantasy IX. I'm expecting it to feel more like The Witcher or something like that. And I know that there was a podcast I did probably a couple of years ago where I might have bemoaned that fact somewhat, you know. Yeah. I know for a while we were really on a kick of what's the spirit of Final Fantasy, and I can't emphasize enough that at this point in my life I couldn't care less about that anymore. I'm so done with that conversation and done with caring about that. So honestly, I kind of just want them to make whatever they feel like making, and I don't care what name is on the box. I just kind of care that it'll be something that'll make me think, that'll, you know, be an interesting and emotional kind of, you know, story experience. That's really more important to me than anything else.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel like making a good game that's really story driven, that tells an incredible story, is like primordial to anything that's like, is it Final Fantasy enough, right?
Yeah.
Like I kind of don't care about that anymore. I kind of don't care.
That question feels totally hollow and meaningless to me now. I know that I was really interested in discussing that, you know, not that long ago, but I guess I've had a complete table flip on that concept where it no longer holds any interest for me.
Now I see the Hylian has a frowny face. Now don't get me wrong, Hylian. It is not like I'm like, I don't care at all whether, you know, it is Final Fantasy or not. I do like that there's chocobos, and I would feel weird if I saw horses instead of chocobos that they were riding or something like that, right? It's just that, like, I think that there's like certain specifics, like, does the game have an ATB system of some sort in there, or, you know, those types of arbitrary things. I don't think that those things really weigh as much to me. Like, for example, when we go back to talking about party members, right? Like, if this was any other game, I don't think I'd care as much, and I really don't care about it as much here, as long as there's the presence of party members, right? So I don't think I need to control them. Does that make sense? Even though traditionally in FF you've always had, like, you know, full control of the party members, right? So I don't think stuff like that as like a checkbox is necessary, right? Make something that is Final Fantasy. And I think that this game aesthetically is very Final Fantasy, right? Like, I think that to me, this feels like maybe a darker take on what the Super Nintendo Final Fantasies kind of had going. So I still feel like it's really Final Fantasy when I look at 16. And the iconic summons, that wasn't a pun, but it is now. The iconic summons, the general themes of it, the focus on crystals, the very, very, very big focus on crystals. And actually the way that they've tied crystals into the story, basically making crystals into like oil rigs. Like, that's the metaphor that Yoshi P has said that they are going for. And I feel like they've tied those ideas into our world in such a mature, interesting way that I'm really excited to see where those things go and the type of metaphors and allegories that they are going to use to kind of paint a picture for us and what we go through in real life. And I think that's why Final Fantasy VII story in particular has stuck with us for so long. And the story behind that game is probably even more impactful and relevant now. Some of the themes, to in particular, like climate change and things like that, and how we treat the earth are even more impactful. And I think actually that 16 is going to touch on some of those same topics. Like the blight apparently is like the land being sucked dry of ether and then nothing can grow there. So I'm kind of like, oh, is that like another type of FF7 metaphor too? Especially when you compare the mother crystals to an oil rig, right? And the ether being oil. Makes you think.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's certainly allusions there to similar kinds of what would you call it? Real world sort of analogies.
Yeah. They were talking about Game of Thrones in FF16, so I'll go ahead and ask you this. Do you see Game of Thrones influence in this?
I mean, I guess I could see where some people might be coming from who don't really like actually watch or engage with a lot of high fantasy in that sort of genre. It's just like everything is Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings to them. Yeah. Because they're not actually fans of that style. So to them, they call that, generic sort of high fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy. I'm writing a fantasy novel in that genre. Well, I finished writing it, but so, there's just like with any genre, there's a lot of different interesting things happening. And so that is not the first thing I would think when looking at Final Fantasy XVI. I would not go, oh, that just looks like Game of Thrones. It doesn't. There's quite a lot of differences, actually. So I think that's pretty lazy as a criticism if anyone's throwing it out there as like a, some way to sort of discredit Final Fantasy XVI. No, I don't think it looks like Game of Thrones. But I can see why someone who's not really into fantasy of that style might take that away just on, a shallow glance at it.
Yeah. I don't think that they have anything, especially like not when this team in particular, if you look at their lineage, have been making these types of high fantasy stories for so long, right? These are people who've worked on 14 and Tactics and Vagrant Story and FF12. And it's just like, things that have existed long before Game of Thrones did.
Yeah, seriously.
Or at least at the very least the television series. So it's just like just like to compare those two things, I feel like it shows a real lack. Yeah, it exactly. It's a good word for it. Yeah. So yeah, I don't really see it either. I know people have thrown it out there. IGN even like went as far enough to like to try to ask them about it. They said no. I believe them. I just don't see No, I do think that there's an opportunity for them marketing wise to take an audience that liked Game of Thrones and be like, hey, you guys like Game of Thrones? Why don't you check out this game?
Yeah, you'll probably like this too, right?
Right. They should play that up marketing wise. I totally would, right? Okay, so I'm going to do one more question from Twitter, and then we'll do one question from chat. If chat had one more question to ask, everyone just kind of dogpile their questions, and I'll pick one. And then that'll wrap things up. Let's see the one. Okay, this is an interesting one. There is a split in the FF fandom and development style. Nojima/Nomura's anime and Yasumi Matsuno and Yoshi P's more mature story world approach. With 16 having combat somewhat advised by the Cage team, it wasn't quite advised. That's kind of a misunderstanding, but we'll go past that.
We're talking about the Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
Kingdom Hearts.
It was Yoshi P saying that like Kingdom Hearts was a great reference within the company for action game design.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Which a lot of people kind of misread as like the Kingdom Hearts team helped with FF16. Gotcha. But that's neither here nor there. I just wanted you to know that in particular.
Okay.
Do you think that this time we'll get a game that brings both fandoms together?
No.
I don't think so. No. If anything, I think that if this game is good, it will actually drive the divide even further.
Yeah, it'll drive an even larger wedge between. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's going to unify the Final Fantasy fandom. I think we got two. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah.
Because, like you said earlier, I think that there are going to be fans of both styles.
Right.
That just kind of like Final Fantasy in general. They just like it also.
Right.
But I think the people who are, I guess this is how I should put it. The people who are really engaged in sort of that tribalistic sort of discourse about which business unit is better than the other, this is really not that much different than, say, console war, discourse online. I don't think that that's going to stop anytime soon. I think that some people, they just get into that. They just get into, this is my team's better than your team. That's a very human thing. You see it in every industry. You see it in everything in the world. So I don't think that's going away.
Yeah. It's just something primitive in our brains that makes us want to divide into teams and then insist that our team is the better team. That's literally the story of humanity, right? Like we cannot seem to shake that dated programming that does not really make any sense in the modern world, but may have had some type of survival mechanism back in the day. But
for sure,
nowadays it doesn't. But people still want to divide up into teams. I think that most sensible people will just be Final Fantasy fans, and they won't really care about creative business units or things like that as much. I don't think that 16 will unify those that are split or those that have their preference, right? Like I think that like you have your preference, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, with which one of these teams you're gonna like more. They're just two different styles and there's two different people. It's more of a problem for Square Enix than it is for you as a Final Fantasy fan. Because they have to decide what Final Fantasy is and what they're going to do with it when they do have two different audiences that are being pulled in two different directions by two different visions, right?
Yep.
So that's a problem for them, managing a business and managing a brand when you do have that. But I do think that the vast majority of people are primordially Final Fantasy fans first, and then it gets into the nitty gritty of which ones they kind of like more, right? And I think it'll stay like that. And I think that after this game releases, I don't think there will be a kumbaya moment, but I do think that people will continue to have their preferences. And I think if this game is really good, then there will be even more people maybe that prefer CPU3 style of storytelling and character designs and such like that. Like I said, I prefer CPU3 for most stuff, but I don't hate CPU1, and I grew up on CPU1, and their titles and their work still means a very lot to me, and I wouldn't be the person that I am with this Buster Sword right behind me. That I would be without those creatives there. And so there's still very much, people and talent that I very much cherish and respect, and I would only say that, that I've come to prefer CPU3 now because the man that I'm at 30, is different, right? And the stuff that they are making is more for that man at 30. And that's okay, because the stuff that CPU1 was making was more for me when I was, 1 through 30.
Sure.
Right. So
somewhere in there.
Right. So it's not like, it hasn't traditionally been for me. It's just, two different phases and points in my life and the experiences that I have, and both have appealed to me in different ways, and the different people that I was at those, points in life.
Right.
So, okay, so let's get this last Twitch chat question. While there are many things from the FF formula that 16 seems to be divorcing from, what are things that stay that you were surprised in seeing or hearing from the developers? I don't know if I know how to answer that one, actually.
Could you answer, or could you ask that question again? I think I missed it a little bit.
While there are many things from the FF formula that 16 seems to be divorcing from, what are things that stay that you were surprised to see or hearing from the developers? I wish maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, it seems like the question is, there's a lot of maybe mechanics or certain aspects of Final Fantasy that 16 is doing away with, say command-based combat, party focus. But what parts of it have stayed that has surprised you, that has stayed? Like, what parts have remained faithful to Final Fantasy legacy, I guess, that you were surprised to see still there?
If not, I have this question right here that would be really good for you to close out, because that one's kind of difficult to answer. I feel like I'd have to play the game first.
Yeah, I feel similarly.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I can really think of is the crystal motif is still there in a really strong way. I mean, ever since the very first one, it's the crystals are diminishing. They've, the powers that govern the harmony of the earth are gone, and so the earth itself is in peril because of this. The fact that we're still able to write interesting stories 30 years later that have that as the central premise is pretty cool.
And still make that sound compelling, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you link it to something in the real world that feels relevant. This one is specifically for you, Mike, from Baby Seal.
Okay.
What is something you want to see in a broader sense happen in story-driven games?
Oh man, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know if at this moment I have a great answer to that, but the first thing that's popping into my mind is that I had a discussion with a game developer named Emily Short. She was on our podcast probably 5 years ago, back when we were still called Dark Pixel. So if you were to search on the channel Dark Pixel Podcast Emily Short or something like that, you'd probably be able to find that video. But she has worked primarily in advancing AI to come up with, to adapt to and come up with unique responses to player input. So one thing that I really am excited to see happen, if we can get there, are games where essentially an AI is serving as the DM of the game. So the game story changes. The AI will adapt and change the story based on the choices you're making in a way we haven't seen or cannot really see now, right? Not just in let's create like a tree of choices here, and you get like 3 choices on a wheel to select here, and the story can go down that path, or that path based on the player input. But you could actually speak to an NPC, and that NPC will have a totally unique and different response to you than to anyone else who played, because what you said to that NPC was different than what anyone else said. And that, on a wider sense, the story could completely evolve, and we'd have an AI smart enough to serve as what like a DM of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign would do, which would be I did not expect you to do that, party members. Crap. Now I have to like scrap my plans for today's campaign and like go on a totally different, that would be a leap in terms of what games could do that would make them enormously interesting to me again. Because I feel like right now, at this point in my life, I've seen just about everything in terms of like what stories do. Particularly in fantasy, it's like, I know where this is going. I can pretty much guess what this character, the archetype they fulfill in the story. I've spent so much time analyzing, I guess, that, I can kind of see things coming. Not that I'm always right. Sometimes I'll still get surprised by things I see. But I feel like that particular leap would really, really shake things up in a way that would make games like, okay, now we have an entirely new sandbox here of just, I have no idea what to expect from this. And that would be really cool. So I would suggest going and listening to her thoughts on how that's developing and where that might be going in the next couple decades. Emily Short is her name, and that was one of the most fascinating discussions I've had with a game developer in my life. So check that one out. It was really, really good talk. And basically, I just handed the floor to her because she had a ton of awesome things to say.
That's incredible, man. Whatever I thought you were going to say, that was even more interesting. Wow.
Well, hopefully, because I didn't really have much else. that was it.
I mean, no, that alone is like something like hugely revolutionary, right? Like an AI being able to basically be like a D&D DM, or GM,
I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I'll take this last one for because it's for me, like really quickly. Many of us are excited about FF16 because of the reputation of good storytelling that CV3 has. Was there any bad storytelling trope that this team has used in the past that you hope doesn't show up in FF16? The fake out devs. Some of the fake out devs are like, some of them are good, and then some of them are not so good. And I think that they overused that trope a lot in Stormblood in particular, which is kind of why some people are kind of on Stormblood.
Stormblood's, that's the one that people like the least, probably, right?
Yeah,
that's the second expansion.
Yeah, and they're all pretty good. Like, they're all extremely well written. Stormblood's usually on the lower tier of it. I still think that Stormblood's really good, but Stormblood does have some problems. Like, it is not free of problems. But in Stormblood in particular, there were some fake out devs that were really just not necessary. I mean, they have faked out Y'shtola dying so many times because they know that's the gut punch and everyone loves Y'shtola. But now whenever they try to act like Y'shtola is in trouble, I'm just like, she'll be okay.
She'll be fine. That's the risk you run. You can't do it. Yeah. You can't do it. Yeah. Then people won't care when you kill them off. They'll think it's no big deal.
Yeah, because with her, they have run that risk so many times with her that I'm just like, she's not going anywhere because she's like the face of the game.
Sure,
she's the moneymaker.
She's the cat ears girl, right?
Yeah, that's the black mage with the cat ears. Yeah, everyone loves her. I love her too, but you keep faking her out, and I'm not gonna actually believe. And the day they actually kill her, I'm gonna be in complete disbelief. But that'll be the day that I'll actually have like some respect for him though, because I'll be like, oh, you actually killed her this time. I'll be like,
there we go.
Wow,
okay, yeah,
immortalize her.
Boy who cried wolf, right? I mean, that's the cautionary tale we're playing with here.
Yeah. But all right, I think that is where we are going to wrap things up. We've gone almost 3 hours. I'm so sorry.
Really? Has it been 3 hours?
It's 2 hours and 50 minutes.
Certainly doesn't feel like it. That's crazy.
Hey, man, good conversation never does. Only to me, I looked at the time and I was like, holy crap, have we really been going?
That's wild.
Felt like maybe an hour and a half.
Tops, I know. At tops. Yeah.
I was like, what? Okay.
Wow.
Mike, for everyone who's coming from my end, please tell them where they can find you.
Anywhere where you listen to podcasts, if you do that, you should be able to find the State of the Arc podcast. State of the Arc, as in Resonant Arc, State of the Arc podcast. But we're on YouTube at Resonant Arc, and
Yeah. And
I have a big Final Fantasy retrospective that maybe will start coming out in January.
Awesome. And if you're watching this on YouTube, the links to all that will be in the description below. Thank you guys so much for sticking through this very long, very thorough discussion about Final Fantasy XVI. Maybe we'll have another one after the game comes out, because I think that'd be really interesting to do. All right.
I don't know if I'll have a PlayStation 5, dude. I don't know when I'll be able to play it.
All right. So you guys know what you got to do. You got to go to Resonant Arc's Patreon and put a little money in there so he can go ahead and get his PS5. It really is a nice system. Yeah.
I have never seen it in stores. I've been anytime I'm in a Walmart, even I'll just drop by just to like see is it there. And I've never seen it in stock anywhere I've ever been.
After 2 years. After 2 years.
Like, how can I even buy one?
Yeah. Well, you have to go online, and if you go through like Sony, they have like this queue system, and you sign up, and then they send you an email, right? Because you're entered into like this basically like a virtual lottery, and then you sit in that virtual lottery, and then eventually you get your number called. They send you the email, and that's when you win an opportunity to purchase a PS5.
That's unbelievable. What timeline are we in, dude? This is too complicated. As a kid, you go into the freaking Toys R Us, you buy a freaking GameCube, and you leave. Like, what?
Yeah, and dude, the worst part is you're still not even actually guaranteed the PS5, right? Because you have to go and you have to sit there online and buy it, and it's just like a limited number of people who are there able to buy it.
Oh my gosh!
When the time goes off, and then those people are the ones that get a PS5. I was fortunate enough to have a friend who was able to snag 2, and he actually gave one to me. I had to pay him back, of course, but
that's too much of a hassle, dude.
Otherwise,
I want that.
Yeah, I mean that's why so many people don't have PS5s, right? Is because a lot of people are just like, dude, I don't want to do that. It's too much work. It's way too much work, right? Like nobody wants to do that. It's just so. All right.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if I have a PS5 or not. I wouldn't be surprised if I don't. Yeah. So we'll see.
Yeah. If not, the exclusivity is only 6 months, and then it'll be on PC. Yeah. Okay. So it's not too bad. Not like FF7R, where it's like a whole year plus.
Yeah, it was like a long time. Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a long time. Actually, no, it was 18 months. It was almost 2 years that it was.
Holy crap!
Yeah,
that's right. Well, that was pandemic time, so I guess that's understandable. But
yeah,